Hi everybody, this is Esmeralda Teresa Hernandez Polanco, and today I was thinking about my research, and I was going to start doing some research on racism actually when I stopped my PhD program. And I thought I had started writing something, but it was more of just compiling my articles. But instead, one of the papers that I found that I wrote when I was in my PhD program is something that I think would be beneficial. It's called Cognitive and Neurological Impacts of Trauma. So this was for my Psych 8318 Trauma Across the Developmental Continuum class. And I wrote this December 11th, 2022. So again, it's Cognitive and Neurological Impacts of Trauma. And I think there's a lot of science behind trauma that people don't talk about, especially the neurology piece. And this is just one assignment that I had, and she made us write it like a Q&A. So I'm going to read it like a Q&A by Esmeralda Teresa Hernandez Polanco. The question is, what is the role of the sympathetic nervous system? The sympathetic nervous system, SNS, is one part of the autonomic nervous system, ANS, and it accelerates the body to react in a fight or flight response when a person detects danger and needs to defend themselves for survival. The sympathetic nervous system sends blood to the muscles, and the glands release adrenaline and cortisol, which increases blood pressure and the heart rate, which excites the body to run for safety or to fight. So think about when somebody undergoes a trauma or there's a crisis that happens, our body does go into fight or flight mode, right? Our amygdala, our limbic system kicks in. And me being a trauma survivor, that's exactly what happened to me. I went into freeze mode where I kind of shut down, and so did my daughter, and we just didn't speak. We stopped speaking to people. And people wanted us to snap out of it and to remember what happened to us, but we couldn't. We couldn't remember everything that had happened to us. And then I went into flight mode, and we moved. We moved for safety reasons, and I kept moving with my kids for safety reasons. It was like I was stuck in flight mode. And then I switched over to fight mode, where I wanted to fight about everything, and I argued with everybody, and you know, it was just normal. It was a normal limbic system type of reaction. And people can still be triggered when you've undergone a trauma. But the thing is, I keep myself calm in many ways, right? So a trauma happened to me 5 years ago. I've overcome it. But I had to really figure out what triggers me and how to calm my sympathetic nervous system. And things that work for me is I like to dance, I like to sing, I could do yoga, read, play with my kids. My brother just gave me some lavender lotion that I put on today. So aromatherapy, getting a massage, painting. There's a lot of things that help me soothe if I'm triggered. And I think that's what's important is you can be a trauma survivor and you can be okay. You can be okay once you've processed the trauma and once you know the science behind it and understand why you react in a certain way to certain triggers. And if we don't know that, we might react in a way and other people see it as, wow, I think she's overreacting, or why is she so argumentative? And they don't know that as a trauma survivor, you could be in that fight mode where you're just sort of fighting because your brain got stuck on safety mode. And that's exactly what happens is it stops the intellectual function of the brain and the executive functioning of the brain, right, in your frontal lobe, and it switches over to your primitive instincts of fight to survive. What is the role of the parasympathetic nervous system? The parasympathetic nervous system, PNS, is the second part of the autonomic nervous system, and it slows down the body. The PNS helps to preserve the digestive system, and it releases acetylcholine, which helps to relax the muscles, regulate the breathing, and slows down the heart rate. So your sympathetic accelerates everything, right? Your blood starts pumping. Usually the blood goes to your extremities for running, for fighting. And then after the danger is over, that's when the parasympathetic nervous system comes in and calms you down. What is the flight, fight, and freeze response? Now, if we're stuck in that traumatic state, you might need to do things to calm your parasympathetic nervous system. Something that helped me a lot too was, before I move on, was to meditate and to be mindful and just to sort of sit here and acknowledge my surroundings based on sound, based on sight, based on touch, based on what I feel. I think being mindful helps us to be present in the moment and not to think about the bad thoughts and not to think about the past. Right? It's not that your past isn't important and doesn't shape you, but there has to be a point where you just say, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I want to leave that in the past. It's my past. I've overcome it. And now this is where I am in my life, and this is where I want to be, and I want to move forward. And so it's important that when someone says, I don't want to talk about that today because I feel like I've overcome it, maybe it's better not to ask those questions, because we want to be respectful that they've done the self-work to get to where they are and they understand their own triggers, and maybe they just don't want to think about that. They want to think of something positive. So let's be respectful when someone says, what happened to you or what's going on? And if they say, I don't want to talk about it right now, then we want to give them that space because we don't want to be the reason they get triggered. What is the flight, fight, and freeze response? When our body and brain sense danger and the limbic system reacts instinctively for survival, the amygdala receives incoming sensory input that is filtered by the thalamus and sends the message to the hypothalamus and brainstem, where the stress hormone is released and the autonomic nervous system is triggered. The body's automatic system moves the muscles motor and releases hormones that cause physiological reactions, which is why people do not rationalize what they are about to do in the situation, and it triggers a fight, flight, or freeze response. The hands and legs may start kicking and punching in an abrasive way to defend ourselves. Our legs are filled with a rush of blood that causes us to run for safety, or our body and internal organs may stop to freeze to allow the blood to rush to other parts of the body, like the limbs. Some parts of the brain may deactivate in shock, causing us to stay still, like an opossum who plays dead. Sometimes hiding and staying quiet is what someone needs to survive from being killed or threatened. This is a result of parasympathetic nervous system that causes our freeze response. I know that's something that soothes my daughter because she underwent this trauma with me. Both my daughters did, but I noticed that being in their tent is kind of helps them with that containing or hiding or feeling protected sometimes. So that's why I bought them their tent. Kids like to do forts. Kids like to be under something because they feel protected, like a turtle shell. And it's okay for children to need that time to soothe or to just hide a little bit. If you see a child who survived a trauma, they hide. They'll go under the table, they go under the desk. And I remember when we first left to Florida, and the teacher said sometimes my daughter would hide under her desk. She was only 4, and she would just hide. She would hide there. And so we have to be sensitive to what someone's undergone, because you don't know why they feel like they need protection, like a turtle. What kinds of somatic symptoms do trauma victims experience? And now she's not like that. I mean, she has her moments where she needs space, but she's also overcome a lot of trauma to where she stopped talking for about a year. She would only speak to me. And now she's super chatty. At least with me, she is. And a lot of people, she's super chatty, and she's overcome a lot. Both my daughters have. My 9-year-old experienced a lot of anxiety, and getting our guinea pigs was very soothing for her, for sensory. And so it happened 5 years ago, and I think because the 3 of us stuck together, and because of my therapeutic background, being a marriage and family therapist with a specialization in Latina family studies, I feel that I wasn't trying to be their therapist, but I had to be the strong one. I'm the mom. I had to be the strong one. Moms don't have the luxury of breaking down. You have to take care of kids. And when you're a mom, I had my nurturing mom side, but I also had my therapist side. It's what tools can I use, not just to help regulate my own triggers and my, sympathetic nervous system, but how can I help regulate my children's? And so I know that people say, you're not a therapist right now, you're a parent. And that's true. I said, but my therapeutic skills can still help me as a parent. My therapeutic skills that I learned as a therapist can still help me as a person. And I try to use that very much. I mean, I don't go walking around diagnosing people because I really don't want to do that. If I'm not getting paid to diagnose you, I really don't want to. Plus, I can't, it's not appropriate to do so. But I think about it that way. I'm so blessed that I studied psychology and that I was a therapist for so many years. And even though I'm human and maybe I have not always reacted appropriately because of my trauma, I sort of knew how to bring myself back from it. And that in and of itself is a blessing. What types of somatic symptoms do trauma victims experience? Because of the intense physiological symptoms that come with trauma and how the nervous system is affected, many victims experience neurological disorders such as fibromyalgia. I have fibromyalgia. Chronic fatigue and autoimmune disease. I have rheumatoid arthritis. That's an autoimmune disease. When the DVC is triggered and activates, the body system slows down too much, that people become unresponsive like zombies, and they may not be in connection with their surroundings. They may collapse, faint, or dissociate. The digestive system slows down during the PNS phase, causing constipation, diarrhea, or nausea. When someone is stuck in flight or fight, they may run, yell, hit, kick, and show abrasive types of motion. Abrasive meaning like this, like where you're about to be hit. What are some of the signs that show a disconnection in the brain during trauma? During trauma, our emotional brain and rational brain are in constant struggle. Due to the flight and fight response, our limbic system reacts first, and it is an automated response to danger, which is the function of the amygdala. At times, when someone is stuck in the limbic system, they may act prematurely and feel that they are in danger when they are not, which happens when the sensory responses travel from their brainstem up. The thalamus sorts out the senses and can experience a breakdown with sensory overload. The brain assesses for danger, then sends the sensory message to the prefrontal cortex, where the human mind can assess the situation, organize, and execute possible solutions to the problem. When the brain works from the prefrontal cortex to the brainstem, then a person can rationalize and organize, being able to act in the best manner possible. When someone is traumatized, the emotional and rational brain are not in agreement, and the emotional responses take over. When the emotional brain takes over, parts of the brain are disconnected, and a person cannot connect past and new memories, which happens in the hippocampus. This is a reason traumatized victims have difficulty with remembering specific parts of the event, and overly general responses occur due to the overgeneral autobiographical memory. When a traumatized individual tries to recollect autobiographical memories, they become stuck as the left brain deactivates due to emotional distress, and they have difficulty recalling specific memories. When new and old information are not able to be incorporated, this affects cognitive functioning. Different types of traumas trigger different sensory channels, which cause different reactions. For example, traumatized individuals who experience motor vehicle accidents indicated higher levels of overgeneral autobiographical memories than traumatized individuals of sexual assault and sudden loss of a loved one. How do trauma affect the brain? Let me actually tell you that this is a quote. For example, quote, let me say that again. Traumatized individuals who experience motor vehicle accidents indicated higher levels of overgeneral autobiographical memories than traumatized individuals of sexual assault and sudden loss of a loved one. This is Zheng and Gray, 2018, page 570. And I'll share my resources after. How does trauma affect the brain? The cognitive brain is considered the rational brain because it is responsible for decision-making, goals, understanding functions, organizing, and time management. The part of the brain that is located right above the spinal cord is the reptilian brain, and it helps us to detect and execute primitive functions such as feeling pain, temperature, eating, sleeping, breathing, having bowel movements. Bowel movements means going to the restroom, number two, and releasing the urine contained in our bladder. The limbic system is the reptilian brain, and it is also the emotional brain. Newborn babies begin to wire neurons in the brain depending on what experiences they have. If babies experience violence, then they will be wired to know fear and anxiety. But if they are nurtured in love, then their limbic system will be wired with safety and love. This neurological wiring in the body can be altered when someone experiences a traumatic event. So, for example, if there's a child in a neighborhood who grows up with gang violence, and they're from infants, their brains are going to be wired with fear and anxiety. But if you raise them in a way of nurturance and love, then they may grow up feeling safety and love. Now, it really comes down to, what do we want for our kids' future? Do we want to break the cycle? We do have the ability to break the chain, but it's hard. It's hard sometimes if somebody's, comes from a history of alcoholism, or a history of drug addiction, or a history of gang violence. It's hard to break that chain. But how are we going to help our kids in the future? What are we going to do differently? It takes one person to say, we need to change something, because our kids are the ones that suffer in the long run. People don't think that children know or understand, and that it's not going to affect them because they're so little. But it's because they're so little that it rewires their brain. Violence and exposure at an early age does affect how the neurons are going to, react, and how more of those neurons are going to develop in their brain as they grow. This neurological wiring in the body can be altered when someone experiences a traumatic event. So now what happens after the traumatic event? Fill them with love, fill them with safety, fill them with STEM activities and hands-on activities and things that will help them. We need to help trauma victims, not shame them, not torture them by asking them the same question 25,000 times, but help them. Truly listen to what they need and what traumatic experience they had and what symptoms they're presenting with and what triggers them. Because if you know that a trauma, something happened to somebody, and then you trigger them and you know it triggers them and you do it on purpose, now you're just being mean. But if this person comes to you and says, you know what, I'm a victim of violence, I'm a survivor of whatever it might be, and this is triggering for me, can you just try not to say it? We're going to try to be conscientious of it, right? This emotional brain limbic system is meant to detect danger so that we can respond in a way that will allow us to protect ourselves and to survive. The hypothalamus and the brainstem assist with how the heart and lungs function, managing the immune and endocrine systems, regulate energy, and maintain equilibrium in the body, known as homeostasis. When the limbic system takes control after trauma, the brain and body are not able to self-regulate, and this causes the brain to stay stuck in the flight and fight response. When victims of trauma stay stuck in flight and fight, they tend to react quickly when triggered, as if the traumatic event is happening again. The frontal brain is the rational brain, which is how we make decisions and organize. When the brain is stuck in the emotional brain, the left side of the brain deactivates. The right side activates more, causing the victim to have anger outbursts. The brain may deactivate and shut down completely, causing a freezing and numbing response in which the dorsal vagal complex DVC activates when the fighting and flighting do not work, causing the body to shut down. The organs stop working at their normal rate. The heart rate lowers, the digestive system stops working, and the metabolism in the body slows down. When the digestive system stops, someone may soil themselves and may feel like they cannot breathe because their lungs start to slow down, their breaths become shallow, senses are shut down due to the DVC, and one may not feel physical pain. So people can hyperventilate and feel like you can't breathe, right? Usually, when somebody's hyperventilating, they're having a panic attack. You feel it here in your chest. You kind of feel the heaviness. And in order to regulate that, you want to do some belly breathing because a lot of people think, oh, I just breathe through my nose and through my lungs. But the truth of the matter is, if we take a deep breath in and hold it and fill our belly, we want our belly to be like a balloon, and then release it slowly. Do that at least 5 times. Some soothing music, whatever it might be. Belly breathing helps us to regulate our breathing if you're having an anxiety attack, if you're having a panic attack. What are therapists trying to do to help reconnect the body? Let me read that again. What are therapists trying to do to help reconnect the mind and body after trauma? Yoga, meditation, and mindfulness are used to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, to slow down and to calm the nervous system. Inhaling speeds up the nervous system when we fill the lungs with air, and exhaling slows down the breathing. The heart rate variability (HRV) measurement is used to measure if the parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system are working in balance. Therefore, body movement activities such as karate and theater help to balance the nervous system. Utilizing mindful techniques also helps us to reconnect and be in tune with the brain and body, and it causes us to be grounded and mindful of the senses in that moment that surround us, to slow down the nervous system. Mindfulness assists people in taking control of their sensations and emotions. Therapists are trying to help trauma victims to identify their social support and to reconnect with others using the polyvagal theory to calm tensions and enhance social interactions. Therapists use breathing exercises and rhythm exercises to take people out of the flight, fight, and freeze response. This process will help traumatized victims to develop healthy relationships because social support helps to decrease stress and trauma. Social support assists with feelings of reciprocity, in which one may feel mutual feelings of love, respect, safety, and compassion. Traumatized people are not synchronized with others and tend to isolate themselves because they have difficulty trusting and building new relationships. Social engagement involves experiences that provide feelings of physical safety and a sense of safety. Mental health providers, healthcare providers, and educators are trying to practice trauma informed interventions to build supportive relationships, social and physically safe environments. Trauma informed care must include an understanding of trauma, respond in a supportive manner, understand the symptoms and signs, and prevent from causing further harm. Further research is being conducted to understand how to help the social emotional component by using all inclusive and confidential ways to assess children at schools. The references I used: Kolk, 2015, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, Penguin Books. Fletcher-Janzen and Harrington, 2020, Translating ACE Research into Multi-Tiered Systems of Supports for At-Risk High School Students, Journal of Pediatric Neuropsychology, and Zheng P. and Gray MJ, 2018, Impact of Trauma Type and Emotion on Overgeneral Autobiographical Memory, Journal of Loss and Trauma, Volume 23, Journal 23, Volume 7, 559 to 573 pages. So here we are. This is just one assignment I turned in my trauma research. I've been thinking about going back to finish my PhD and to continue my research because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing research in trauma. When I worked as a therapist, I became trauma informed and trained, and TFCBT trained, trauma focused cognitive behavior therapy trained. And I knew that I loved working with trauma victims. I just knew that that was my niche. When you are in the field of psychology, there's so many different branches of psychology that you can choose. You can do sports psychology, you can do forensic psychology, you can do trauma work, you can focus on cognitive psychology, developmental psychology. There's just so many branches in psychology, organizational psychology. And I feel that my expertise became trauma. And it's not just because I was TFCBT certified. I was chosen to go to conferences that had to do with trauma and grief, traumatic grief and loss. And I loved I loved my research when I was in my PhD program, whether it was disaster relief, whether it was about military. I read articles about trauma in military. I read articles about trauma in PD. I read articles about trauma in immigrants, refugees, and trauma because of racism, and trauma because of poor self-esteem, and trauma because of so many different branches of why would someone be traumatized. Gang violence, sexual assault, child abuse. I read so many articles, and I feel blessed. I feel blessed with the knowledge that I have, because a therapist, me having worked as a therapist for many years and being a psych major, it didn't exempt me from having a traumatic experience myself that affected my life in many ways. And it doesn't exempt you from being a victim of violence. So I'm happy that I have this knowledge, and I'm happy that it didn't stop me from continuing research and continuing reading. And I did check out 2 schools last week. On Wednesday, I went to Fuller Seminary, and I went to the Claremont University Graduate School. I think it's called Claremont Graduate University. And I was able to get a tour and talk to a PhD student in their 3rd year. And I was able to nerd out a little bit and talk about statistics and what they do and research methods and some of his research. And I love education, and I loved being on a campus and just being there and seeing people studying and people in the library doing research. It brings me joy. It brings me joy to do research. And so that's why a part of me just wants to continue research and continue to be in that field of study. So let's see, wish me luck. I still feel like I need to do my research and check out a few more programs so that I can start again, and have my transcripts sent from NCU where I was attending, so that they could check my transcripts and give me credit, because I already took statistics and I already took research methods, and I took some other research like scholarly writing, and I took 3 trauma courses, and I did very well. So hopefully this is helpful for anyone that is a trauma victim, or anyone that knows somebody that is experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. It's something that, military and sexual assault victims and police departments and people who are exposed to a lot of violence, gang members, people who are exposed to a lot of violence, do live with post-traumatic stress disorder every day, but sometimes they don't know they have it. So let's just be sensitive to people, because we don't know their past. We don't know what happened to them. And when I was at Pacific Oaks College, one of my advisors for my thesis, when I was writing my thesis, and one of my professors, she told me, and it was in a course, she didn't just tell it to me, she told it to everyone, you can't just look at a person without looking behind them, because behind them carries their history, the life that they lived, their trauma experiences, their joyful memories, their bad memories, that causes them to react in a certain way. And only then, when we know their story and know their history, will we truly be able to help them, because we're not treating the symptoms, we're treating the person, because every person is different. And yes, when we provide a diagnosis like post-traumatic stress disorder, 2 different people could have PTSD, but they might not respond to certain stimuli, or they might not have the same triggers depending on what they endured. And we have to be mindful of that. We're treating the person on a case-by-case basis, and if we're not, we're doing something wrong, because not everybody's the same. Not everybody has the same history. Not everybody's going to react in the same way. So I think it's important to know this, so that we can be sensitive, or we can be understanding when somebody, quote unquote, overreacts because we don't know what they've survived. All right? Have a wonderful day. I love you, Evangeline and Belina, even though this is more adults for adults, so I probably won't put this in the made for kids category. I'll just put this in the, teens and adults category. Hopefully this information is helpful and pass it on to someone you know. Have a great day.